Hello and welcome everybody to a special edition episode of Comic DNA on which we are not discussing any book. This is kind of a experimental episode that we're doing. I have my good friend Alex Harner here, and Alex and I, we're just going to kind of hang out and we're going to talk about one specific topic that we've kind of hinted at before. If you've listened to any of our old episodes, you might know that we like to talk about X-Men books. And he and I have been talking, and we might be talking about some more X-Men comics on the channel. But one of the things I wanted to lay out, and I had sort of briefly just been explaining this to Alex, which is why he doesn't have anything to say on the subject, is that I'm going to be doing more content with this podcast, but I'm going to be branching it out instead of just talking about a comic, getting a friend or another comic book creator and talking about a comic that we've read. I'm hoping to do more creator interviews and just kind of hangouts where we just kind of discuss a topic of some sort that is interesting to both of us. I've tried this before, actually. Like last month, I had creator John De La Rose, and he's a writer, and we had a nice discussion, and then I lost everything in some software failure. It was around the same time that Alex and I lost the first time we tried to record the Building Stories podcast. And so, but I'm going to be doing more of that, and I'm going to be doing more just like branching out and kind of doing some different stuff. But enough about all of that. One of the things that Alex and I specifically are to talk about is the X-Men. And I think the plan right now, Alex, is we're going to read the first 12 issues of the X-Men. Those would be the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby issues.
The very first issues.
Yes,
way back.
Very first, from 1964, 1965, that time period. Now, you've never read those before, have you?
I have not, no.
You haven't even read like a reprint of the first issue, X-Men number 1?
In passing, probably years back, but I have never, not recently, and I couldn't talk about it in any specificity.
Well, they're, I think they're kind of interesting comics. I have read them, actually, myself. It's been a few years. But, they're not that good. Like, that's the kind of the spoiler alert, is that, out of all the stuff that Jack Kirby did, especially the stuff that Jack Kirby and Stan Lee did together, it's easily the weakest of all of them. I mean, it's like Jack Kirby and Stan Lee's Fantastic Four was great. The Avengers was good. Like, they made some great comics together. Mm-hmm. But X-Men, those 12 issues, I mean, Jack Kirby only stayed on for like 11 and a half issues. Like, by the last couple of issues, he was really only doing breakdowns, and he wasn't doing the final art. They brought in another artist to do that. But I also think, there's a lot of like interesting little things that go on with the early X-Men, especially how like when you talk about the X-Men now, there's such like gravitas, there's such weight to it because the X-Men is kind of a big deal. Like, it's a big property. It's been around for a long time. It's huge movies going on right now, and there was a period where it was like the most popular comic book in America,
For quite a while, right?
Yeah, for like quite a
years
while.
running.
Yeah. You get at least, I think it's safe to say it spanned like 2 decades at least, where it was like the most popular comic.
Right.
And
but that wasn't until well into the 70s, right?
That wasn't until like 1977 when it was restarted.
Gotcha.
After it got canceled. The sales were so low. The sales were so low in the 60s that it got canceled. And for sales to be low in the 60s, that means you're still selling like 10 times as much as some of the highest selling books are selling now.
Right.
But that's a whole different
right.
paradigm.
That's an interesting difference. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's an interesting like point in time. I like to look at it. Just at, like how it all started and how it's like a funhouse mirror version of what you've come to know the X-Men as. Mm-hmm. And it's still like a significant part of the continuity because Marvel is all about their never-ending continuity and how everything is, all a part of it. So you'll always see references to the costumes and occasional references to, when Cyclops was a kid, and then of course now you've got the young X-Men hopping around. I don't know. I don't really follow any of the new ones.
Who even knows these days? We're old.
I certainly don't. I'm an old curmudgeon.
I think though, so this is going to be totally new for me, and I'm excited for it because we've been talking about the X-Men since high school. But
it's really never stopped. It's been the only link between us.
The only thing driving our friendship, really.
Right.
The X-Men. But our knowledge of the X-Men started with the X-Men in the 90s, and then we sort of started to fill in the gaps, and we've since gone back and read a lot of the Claremont stuff. But I have never gone all the way back to the 60s, so I think it'll be interesting to see kind of where the themes started, even if they weren't so good.
Yeah. And I think, it'll be good to get like a fresh perspective on it from somebody who's never read it, and especially from somebody who's a considerable X-Men fan yourself, right?
I try to be pretty dedicated.
That's the thing is like there are a lot of people that are pretty big fans of the X-Men who are just totally unfamiliar with the pre-Claremont stuff,
right?
And as a matter of fact, I was just a few weeks ago I was talking to a friend of mine who I had been talking to, trying to do a podcast with, and I had mentioned to him, I was like, I'm gonna be doing some old X-Men issues, like we're just gonna be kind of reading them and talking about them, and his eyes lit up, and he goes, "Oh my God, I am the biggest fan of the X-Men, the old issues. I love all those old issues, the old Claremonts, and John Byrne and Neil." And I was like,
right.
"Oh no. We're going all the way back. We're going to read the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby stuff." And he goes, "Oh, I've never read that." He just like immediately kind of was like, he didn't even consider that the X-Men. Like,
yeah, it's funny,
it was just so out of scope. Yeah.
All the archetypes and all the characters that are so well known and so well loved are a result. Well, obviously Stanley got the ball rolling, but it wasn't really until Claremont that all those big stories kind of became, locked in.
Yeah,
and became the thing everybody referenced and everybody talks about.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be kind of our point of view and kind of our, like, what we're looking for when we read these and talk about them. It's, like I said, I read them and they're really not great comics. Like, I love a lot of old Silver Age comics. Like, I love the Steve Ditko Spider-Man stuff. Even just the Marvels, like, I love Stan Lee comics. The Fantastic Four is great. The Spider-Man is great. And, This is not the greatest, but it's just interesting how it, like, eventually years later turned into this big thing. And so I kind of we can read it kind of with that perspective of, like, how does this fit in with what it eventually became and how it got reinvented and what aspects of it were there from the beginning and what kind of, had to be dropped or molded or changed or, what have you. I think that'll be kind of where we're coming from when we talk about this.
Yeah, it'll be a bit of a discovering the X-Men history that nobody talks about.
Exactly, yeah.
Although maybe it's worth noting that in the current continuity, which neither of us really follow, the original 5 X-Men are present. So maybe there's been some attempt to make a nod to these very old comics, but neither of us really care. So
right, I don't want to sound too callous or anything, but I don't read a lot of new X-Men comics, and we're not going to really talk about them. I kind of had this decision where I was like, if we're going to talk about comics, especially X-Men comics, we have to talk about old ones because they're just so much more removed from the industry. Like,
yeah,
as a comic creator myself, I don't want to put myself into a uncomfortable position where I'm like offering critiques to people that are much more successful than me. It's
a dangerous
just,
game.
It's just rude, is what it is.
Unprofessional.
Unprofessional, yeah. But no, but actually, it's because I honestly,
am not a comic. Maybe I'll go off the handle every once in a while.
I might vicariously live through Alex. No, actually,
Be
it's
the
just
mad
because
dog.
I don't have time to read a lot of new comics, and I just like reading old comics. There's just something about them that I enjoy, which maybe is something we'll discuss, on the podcast as well.
Yeah, well, our intent in doing this is to enjoy these as they were, to talk about sort of what made them interesting, and not to try and tie them into the current continuity mega narrative.
Yeah, that's the other thing is like, that's the other reason why I can't, like, it's easier to talk about old comics because they're kind of removed from that. Yeah. Like newer comics, there's this element, you're wrapped up in the whole, well, like the continuity, but that's also that's the selling point of how they're selling them,
Right. It's like they're daring you to connect all the dots.
Exactly. Yeah. Which
we're not really going to try and do that.
Yeah, I'm not interested in doing that, and that's sort of a different discussion, a different critique of current comic book industry, as it were.
Indeed.
The inability to tell singular stories, but we're not going to necessarily go down that road just yet. Maybe for a future episode.
Wait for it.
But yeah, I'm kind of excited.
I am extremely excited, Aaron.
Well,
there's no kind of good. About this.
I'm glad you're excited because every now and then I have this thing in me, this like division where I really love comics, and this is the part of this special episode where I bare my soul. I don't do this very often.
Well, this will be good.
I have this thing where like I really like comics, and it's very difficult to be an independent comic book creator when you kind of don't know who you're trying to appeal to, because indie superhero stuff, which I have done, and I'm currently doing some indie superhero stuff. It's a very hard sell because although superheroes are like considered the mainstream top, selling point, the people that are buying it aren't interested in indie stuff. And the people that are buying indie stuff aren't interested in superheroes on the whole. So there's this weird, like indie superhero comics are always kind of weird. And I have this, I've talked to other creators that kind of have this too, where like, I've talked about this on the podcast. Like I like superheroes. I think you can do fun, different stuff with it that isn't necessarily being done in a Marvel or a DC book. Mm-hmm. But then when you finish it and you have this finished book, you kind of feel, sometimes you feel like you don't belong anywhere. Like I'm too indie for mainstream superhero comics, but I'm too mainstream for indie comics. And
it's a hard road to walk.
It is. And I'm really only bringing this up to talk about, or to kind of juxtapose against this podcast, the way I've been doing it. I've been reading just any type of comic. And I love talking about, the literature art comics. I mean, I've talked about more of them with you, Alex, than anybody else. We've talked about Asterios Polyp, we talked about Blankets, Will Eisner books, Building Stories. These are all fantastic books, and absolutely. I can talk about them for a long time, as you can tell from the episodes that we recorded. But I do also like just talking about kitschy, four-color superhero stuff. So it's always hard to tell. Like it's always hard to kind of gauge like where you fit in with that. And it's funny because like I told you earlier about my friend who, this was a comic book creator actually, who was all excited. He's like, "Oh, that's great that you're talking about the X-Men," and then he was shocked when he was confused when it wasn't like the good X-Men comics. But then I was talking to another creator friend of mine, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm kind of working on this thing. I'm going to be doing some of the old X-Men, comics." And he just kind of rolled his eyes and groaned, And he was like, "Oh, X-Men, huh?" Because this was a friend who's I'm not naming any names. He can out himself if he wants to. He's been on the podcast and he likes listening to the podcast. He listens to it and he's like, "Oh, X-Men. I like it when you talk about like Alex Robinson comics and
That was my dog.
like talk yeah."
Sorry.
He's like, talk about more Will Eisner stuff. Like that's what I like.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I like all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we obviously we love talking about the art comics, but I've got high hopes for talking about the X-Men because I think of all of the traditional 4-color superhero books, this is the one that again we've talked about X-Men for 15 years. Like,
oh yeah,
this is the one where we're like. Maybe not fanboys, but we have some irrational love of the property, even when it's not very good.
Yeah, exactly. Like the whole fanboy stigma. That's a tough one because you don't want to be stuck with it, especially as a creator. That's the even worse thing. Is like, as a creator, I want to be respected as a creator. I don't want people to think that I'm just trying to make a name for myself. Just because I'm a big fan of the X-Men, which of course I am a big fan of the X-Men, but like
we're going to bring the full power of our critical faculties, as seen in your other podcasts, the most artsy of books, to every X-Men comic.
And that's I hope we actually can. That's my fear is that we don't, and that we're just like, oh man, I loved it when Magneto tore that thing open. It was so cool.
Man, his helmet's so sweet.
Exactly. I love the design of the helmet. No, I think, if there was anybody that I think I could discuss, X-Men comics with, it would be the same guy that I could discuss Chris Ware and David Mazzucchelli comics with.
Well, thanks, man.
Yes.
We'll strive to be worthy of that.
I think it'll work. And the other thing too with this this X-Men podcast, it's gonna be something I'm gonna try and feature more on YouTube, and we're gonna come up with a visual design so that we can show more of the maybe specific references of things that we talk about, and it's gonna be a little bit more structured than the traditional episodes, like this one even. Like I said, I'm gonna be doing a lot of new stuff, creator hangouts and interviews and just kind of stuff like this. But this is gonna be something that's kind of its own thing. I think we can distill it, maybe make shorter episodes, not have it be long and rambling, and just kind of really like bullet point everything about the issue.
It'll be a concentrated blast of just profound thoughts and lightning quick observations.
And also the only correct opinions you need to hear about the X-Men.
Yeah, that's my goal.
That's my goal. That's a lofty goal.
That's why I get up in the morning. Just getting ready to crush X-Men opinions.
And I just yesterday, I recorded an episode with my friend Gabriel Dunstan on Evan Dorkin's Welcome to Eltingville, which is a book about a bunch of comic book nerds and how they all hate each other and just argue about comics all the time. You'll have to listen to the episode to get the full effect. But there's so much truth in it, and parts of that book were very uncomfortable because it was just like, oh my god, this is my life. This is me and Alex talking about X-Men. Oh my god.
Well, then it's also going to have to be a podcast about building bridges.
Yes.
I don't know what that means, but we'll try.
It sounded high-minded.
It did. Well, I hope so.
It sounded smart. Sounds pretty smart.
Yes.
But I think our plan for this episode, other than just being kind of like rambling, was to just kind of set up what we were going to do with the this X-Men podcast. And that was the other thing. I kind of wanted to explain why I'm even doing the X-Men podcast, and why I'm branching out and trying to do more stuff. Is that I'm trying. I have to admit I'm not very good at it. But I'm trying to have more regular content that I can post on the podbean.com where I post the podcast and on the new YouTube channel. I don't know. I'm stuck in this whole thing where I'm trying to make comics. I don't talk about it that much on the podcast except at the end, when I plug my stuff and I go to thebirdlander.com to read my comic The Birdlander. But I don't really talk a lot about making comics because I really, really, really hate talking about myself. I can't stand it. I really can't. And part of that frustration comes with making comics is you have to be very visible and you have to be have an online presence and you have to treat it like it's a professional job and not a hobby, and everybody's got all these little catchphrases and truisms to tell you about how to make it in comics. And I was born an angry old man, and I don't have time for any of that BS cheerleading feel good nonsense. Which is not to say that it's wrong. I know myself, and I know that I can't be the social media expert that you have to be in order to maneuver the new industry, as it were. And I'm trying to create regular content here and to be visible. And the only way I can do that is by essentially taking the time that I would normally be talking to Alex about pointless, useless X-Men stuff, and just recording it. And now we have a weekly podcast. Instead of this is all just time wasted. Yeah, because every time I try to do, for the last year, I didn't have a lot of time to do the podcast, and part of that was because it becomes a real pain in the butt trying to wrangle schedules. Some of my favorite episodes are the ones where I had, 3 other friends on it, and we all talked, the Blankets episode. I really liked that Blankets podcast. I thought we had a really, really good discussion.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing I would like to do more of, but it is really hard to wrangle and, set up a schedule for 3, people, 4 people, myself included. And it just became kind of difficult to do a weekly podcast. So this, I think, is something that, as I was just, casually joking about, it's just time that Alex and I would have spent talking about the X-Men anyway. So I might as well just record it and we'll turn it into an episode and
give it some structure. There we go.
Yeah, give it just a little bit of structure and boom, we got content that I can put out there and try to half-assedly make.
So this is
social... I don't want.
This is all a half-assed publicity grab. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't want you to get too cynical on me, Alex, because I'm cynical enough for the both of us. But,
well, this is Aaron's take on things. I, on the other hand, believe that again, we're going to build bridges. We're going to shoot for the moon. We're going to
shoot for the moon.
Insert any number of easy words that sound good.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I appreciate your
stop
optimism.
talking. I'm not helping.
That's good. That's good. But so that's why we're doing the X-Men thing. It's something that we can do a little bit more regularly, and it's also because the other thing too is I get crazy about editing podcasts, and it's time that I'm reading books and all this stuff when I should be writing, because I've got comic deadlines and comics is what I want to do, but it's it sucks. Not to sound too depressing or anything, but it's just time that it's a grind. Yeah, it is a grind. So I love talking about comics. I really do. And so it's an easy thing for me to do weekly while also spending all my other time writing and arguing with artists and making sure Ed doesn't get behind on his designs and making him feel good about himself and telling him that his art is pretty. And oh God, I hope he doesn't listen to this. And I know he is too, because he's one of the other people that listens to all the podcasts.
Don't worry, Ed. I'll get Aaron back with a good zinger at some point.
Ed's the best. Ed is the best. And if you don't believe me, just read the comic that we do called The Birdlander at www.thebirdlander.com. We're just about finished with it, actually. We've got 4 pages left, and then it's done.
Wow.
I'm
Congratulations.
shocked.
That's really exciting.
Yes, it is exciting to actually have a finished book. That was a little bit more of a tangent than I was planning on going on. But that's okay.
This is just a statement of intent, right?
Yeah, it's a statement of intent, and it's also kind of I was kind of like underhandedly.
That was dog bark number 2.
What's your dog's name again?
My dog's name is Pepper.
Pepper.
So,
is she speckled? Wait, is boy or a girl?
She's a girl. Yes,
she's a girl. Okay. Is she like speckled?
She has a kind of a salt and pepper coat, so it's a mix of kind of gray, black, and white. It's looking. But
I assumed that from the name Pepper.
Yeah,
I'm a good detective.
But it's worth noting that as we do these podcasts, it will be Aaron and I, and sometimes Pepper. She is excitable and has a somewhat piercing bark. So.
Well, mentioning that, I'm going to talk to a few people. I might see if we can get some guests on the X-Men episodes.
That would be super fun.
That would be fun, and I always like getting other friends into a good nerd discussion. And also, apparently, nobody's read the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby X-Men issues, so it's all new to everybody.
Right.
So
have a bunch of fresh opinions.
Exactly. And then also we can explain it to any listeners so they won't have to read it either. They won't ever have to read them ever. We'll just explain it all to them and show them all the money shots.
It's brilliant in its simplicity.
Yes. Genius.
Genius.
But no, I was saying, this episode is just kind of a statement of intent about our X-Men discussion, and also kind of an example of some of the looser episodes that I will be doing with other creators. Now, Alex isn't a comic creator yet, but
when you say yet,
I mean, I guess I could say technically you are. You did those 6 knockout pages, I think.
I mean, I did a comic pitch, and I dabble in I have dabbled in shorts, but it's been a while since I've done that. So,
well, I'm gonna make good on my Alex. Alex is a professional artist. He's, what here's the thing, Alex. You're better than a comic book artist because you're an artist who actually makes a living doing his art.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much actual art I do is the thing. So,
fair enough.
That's what it is. On a computer, and I manage documents. And that's what it is.
Hell, I could do that.
No, you could.
And I didn't need to go to college for 9 years.
Just got to get a fancy degree, and then you can be an architect. So.
I don't have the money for that.
Yeah, no one does.
I don't have the patience or the passion for architecture that you have.
I know my passion for architecture is always shining through. So glad you've noticed that.
Yes, I have. Someday I'm gonna make good on my threats to turn Alex into a comic book artist, and if and when we have something to show, we'll talk about it more then. But
we will.
But yes, I intend to do more episodes like this where me and another creator are just kind of hanging out and talking about stuff, and you gotta get rambling tangents that don't really go anywhere, like this sentence I'm currently stuck in.
Keep it going.
Oh, God.
I kid.
So we don't have a whole lot more to talk about. We set up our statement of intent about the X-Men. But I had one thing I wanted to ask you before we just kind of snap it shut this episode. So, as we've been talking about here, you and I have been fans of the X-Men for a long time.
Yes.
Could you give me, what's your best armchair psychologist reason as to why the X-Men resonates with you so much.
Man, I've been pondering a similar question that I was maybe going to throw you. But I think, so I got into the X-Men with the X-Men cartoon, which came out when I was in first grade, I believe. And I think at that time, at that age, the abundance and diversity of exciting and interesting characters was really compelling. And there have been a million properties since that have sort of run with that. And there have been properties before the X-Men that have done a good job of that. But I think the real strength, the thing that comes to mind at the moment is that it is a very large cast of colorful, surprising, interesting characters. And when I was a kid, that was really exciting. And when done well, it continues to be exciting. How's that for a response?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like ultimately why everybody likes the X-Men, like the people that really like it. Like I will occasionally see somebody, I've seen comic book professionals that are like, oh, I love comics, I'm into comics, and, I'm working on this book now. Like not indie idiots like me, like actual professionals. And they'll say things like, I never really got the X-Men, I'm not into it, I'm drawing this book now. And and that's so weird to me. Because to me, this is going to sound crazy, but to me, like, the X-Men is basically synonymous with comics. Like to me, like X-Men is what comics are.
Okay.
And that's part of, a lot of that is just from, like, just the childhood impression,
Sure.
So I get that. Like, I just can't remove the idea of comics from the idea of the X-Men because they're just so embedded into the developmental period of, my life.
Right. They got big when we were at an age where we were first discovering comics. So that was like the comic. And then you found out about there was a whole world of comics. But in terms of the timing, that makes perfect sense. Right.
And I guess it's part of what kind of keeps me on with the X-Men is that as a kid I read it for kid reasons, like you said, colorful characters, it's action, it's a wonderful setting. It's like a superhero book, but not exactly a superhero book. Like there's a significant difference between reading Superman and reading X-Men.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah, significant difference. And as an adult, I find that I still really, really appreciate the X-Men. I should say as like a creative or a wannabe creator. Maybe I'll put it like that. As a wannabe creator, I really appreciate the X-Men on maybe it's the same level as a kid, but I want to say on a deeper level, maybe. I'm willing to say that I think the X-Men might be one of, if not the greatest piece of American mythology that's ever been created. I think you and I have sort of discussed this before, and this might be something we can talk about in more in depth, in the future. But I really do think that the X-Men is brilliant. And I think it's purely American. I think it is not something that could have ever been created anywhere else at any other point in time than in America in the 60s. And I think that it's incredibly profound in I don't want to say profound in its simplicity because that sounds just kind of cliche, but I think it was deeper than even Stan Lee understood when he was just kind of coming up with base ideas.
I think it became bigger than his initial.
Yes, exactly.
idea.
I think it became bigger. Like And I really do think that it is one of the most important pieces of American fiction.
Hmm.
The problem with that is, as you and I have discussed multiple times, is that the actual number of quote good X-Men comics versus the number of bad X-Men comics,
right?
It's not a favorable ratio.
It's kind of the it almost becomes the Kill Bill kind of synopsis of Superman, where Bill says, "You read, Superman. I don't really read the comics, but I love the mythology."
Exactly,
X-Men's kind of that. Like,
it's exactly like that, and the mythology really resonates, and I think that's why. I mean, it's at least in part why like the movies have stuck around as long as they have, despite being seemingly intentionally trying to destroy the franchise over at Fox.
Hit and miss. Sure.
But like people still want the X-Men, and I mean we could even go into all the the real conspiracy theories about how Marvel is trying to actually kill the book because they don't own the film rights, and it's all some big billionaire chess game.
We'll have a special episode dedicated purely to conspiracy theories. That'd be good.
All those conspiracy theories. Even despite that, there's still a lot of people that just really like and want. The X-Men resonates with them.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some very obvious base just like aspects of human condition that are built into the mythology of who these characters are and the world that they live in.
Mm-hmm.
That means it is something that can endure forever and be adopted to pretty much any point in time in any situation. While, as I said, also being something that is uniquely American and uniquely like cultural revolution time period.
Yeah.
That's a weird way to say it, but that's how I feel about it.
No, I think when I was a kid, I wasn't really aware of sort of the bigger buzzwords that people now use to describe the X-Men. But I think...
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Like the X-Men is a kind of a melting pot of characters from different cultures and backgrounds. Is very American, and even as a kid, it was exciting because there was so much to sort of absorb. Like when you're a kid, you and when you're an adult too, but especially when you're a kid of a certain age, you kind of latch onto things. Like I assume most kids do this. I latched onto dinosaurs at one point. I latched onto jets. And I would get like books, and I
had both of those.
Yeah, you like learn everything about them.
Full
cars,
of dinosaurs.
maybe. Like you'd get like you'd want to know the stats. You'd want to know the all the little specifics. And the X-Men, when I was a kid, it was like this character's Cajun. What's a Cajun? Like, and then I had to read up on that, and then I had to and this character's, from Germany, and he's a Roman Catholic, and I wasn't a Roman Catholic, so what's the deal with that? Like, there was so much there to kind of keep digging into, which at the time was just exciting because I was a little kid, but you get older and you realize it was the depth of the diversity that made it interesting, and kind of learned from it.
What's incredible is how, and not to date ourselves too much, but as a kid becoming obsessed with the X-Men and trying to learn everything about them, I don't know how I did it without the internet.
Yeah.
I don't know how I was able to memorize all of these characters' histories and all of the important issues where things happened without reading the issues.
We picked up what we could.
Yeah.
X-Men cards helped. That was
I was about to say
90s.
Card collecting. Yeah, I still got a bunch of cards somewhere, and they all had
little factoids,
footnotes, the little factoids on them. Exactly, and that was the Wikipedia before Wikipedia.
Yeah,
and they were able to sell that, and they were just like, buy this card, and it has a little piece of information on it, and also a picture of your favorite character.
Yeah,
And it was
Pretty
just
cool.
like, as a kid,
Gotta
you're just
get 'em
like,
all.
okay, gotta get them all. And then Pokemon came along and perfected it, but
Yeah.
uh,
That was after our time.
yeah, that was a little after. But yeah, but yes, I know exactly what you mean about, like, as a kid, you just become obsessed with learning all of the characters' histories and everything. Just, what is all? It felt so expansive and deep, like
Yeah.
like like there was so much to learn from it.
Right. I would definitely not have used the word diversity at the time, but like compared to like He-Man or Ghostbusters.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's not really that much to know. You're just like, this is cool and whatever. But like there were layers to the X-Men. The characters were from everywhere. They had really robust histories. It was like you had to know. You had to dig into it.
And I think it was fiction sort of unlike any other fiction you had experienced as a child.
It was a little darker, a little more dangerous.
Yeah. Oh,
Parents,
for sure. I mean, especially
parents
talking
didn't
about
always
like
appreciate it.
yeah, especially talking about like the actual comics that were being made in the 90s. I remember the talking to I got about having about reproducing some Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld art in my little drawing book.
Right. Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah. Talking to as well.
This was the era of Marvel swimsuit edition issues.
That was a thing that actually happened.
And they're beautiful, like in their awful kitschiness. And at the time, they were beautiful for entirely more disturbing reasons. But yes, it was a confusing, difficult time.
We've got so much material for these podcasts.
So much, yeah. I could talk. I mean, this is the whole thing. It's like, again, like I don't want to sound like one of those weirdo fanboys. The types of people that might be listening to this podcast. I don't want to. But like, I could talk about the X-Men forever. Like, I really could. And that's both a point of shame and a point of pride for me. It's confusing.
Such is our lot. What are you going to do?
Yeah, such is our life. but yeah, it will be interesting reading the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby issues, knowing all of this, talking about all the diversity and how deep it is and profound it is, and then getting these. I will say, first of all, I want to preface this by saying I actually think there are some good issues in the first 12. I think my first read of them, I think my initial read was there were probably 4 good issues out of the 12.
Okay.
That's just based on my memory. I don't know. We'll see how that holds up when we read through it again. But it will be interesting to contrast all of this, nostalgic fanboy gushing over how great the mythology of the X-Men is compared to the actual completely like new Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, no history involved, barely any idea of how these characters operate, barely any idea of what a freaking mutant is in the context of the Marvel Universe. Which has its own sort of appeal and makes it interesting in its own right. But,
is it all right? So is it in the first 12 issues that Frankenstein makes an appearance?
I honestly don't remember.
Okay, we'll see what happens. Stay tuned, listeners. We'll discover if Frankenstein is in the first 12 or if it's later.
I remember there's some really weird stuff with some aliens, and I think the devil shows up. But I mean, that's nothing new in the X-Men,
sometimes the devil shows up.
I know, Alex, you're well versed in Nightcrawler's confusing origin, so
well versed,
all
yes.
about the devil.
Didn't used to be, man.
Yeah.
Didn't used to be.
It used to be so simple. But that's another discussion we'll kind of get into. Like as we're reading these issues, whether or not something feels like it should be in the X-Men according to how we think how we feel like the mythology is versus how these issues actually are.
Right, when they're still finding their way.
Yeah, exactly. While they're finding their way, because this is where I reveal that I'm not an actual real X-Men fan, because there are a lot of Claremont issues that he does stuff that I'm just like, oh man, this is not what would go in the X-Men for me. And it's like the foundational. This is freaking Chris Claremont we're talking about. You know, the guy that basically laid the foundation of everything that is the X-Men. And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
Magic and the X-Men.
You can't.
Well,
they can't all be hits, you know.
I know.
Yeah.
Talk about some of these weird character continuities. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I think we've talked this up enough. We'll be recording the first episode of our X-Men. It's going to be like a Comic DNA offshoot. I don't know. We haven't really come up with whether or not we should have its own name. I guess that was the other ironic thing I forgot to mention. Do you remember, Alex? I don't know how many years ago it was at this point. It had to be like 3 years ago. Before I went to my good pal Luke Thompson Moritz about doing this podcast, Comic DNA, he was the first co-host on it with me. And do you remember before I did that, I went to you and I said, we should do a podcast about the X-Men. Because all we do is talk about X-Men comics. So let's just do that as a podcast. And
I think that was like, podcast? That'll never take off.
Yeah. You were like, I don't know how to do a podcast.
Computers.
Computers
YouTube.
On the internet? YouTube, you can't make money on YouTubes. Go back to the ham radio.
Well, here we are now.
Here we are now, years later, and you're doing it, Peter. You're doing it.
You're playing with us.
Exactly.
Yeah. Here we go.
So I think actually this is just a little bit of pointless trivia for anybody that managed to still be listening. My initial pitch to you was that we were going to do an X-Men podcast where we would talk about old issues and just about how either good or stupid they are. And I wanted to call the podcast Mutant DNA because I didn't want to do something lame. Or I shouldn't say lame. I should say something that was already taken, like, you know, the X-Men podcast or, you know,
200 notes.
Files. Yeah, exactly. And I thought, oh, Mutant DNA. That's clever, but not really. And you were like, no, I'm not doing a podcast. That's lame. And so I said, all right, we won't talk about X-Men podcast because I can't talk with Luke about X-Men podcast. He doesn't know anything about the X-Men. And I said, all right, well, we'll just talk about other comics, and we'll call it Comic DNA, for just to sound pretentious, you know, like, I don't know what it means. I got comics in my DNA.
It was about the fundamental building blocks of comics.
Yes, there's some smart way to put it like that. You know, it makes me sound like I know what I'm doing. And that was the origin of Comic DNA, and here we are, full circle. Back to the X-Men version of it. Congratulations, Alex.
Well, thank you. It took you a while to convince me, but I'm ready to go. Ready to do this.
Well, I know how these things go. I have to put myself out there and just like struggle embarrassingly for a long time until you can be like, okay, that's been long enough. I think.
All right, we'll help him.
I think I can.
We'll step in at this point, I guess.
Yeah, my savior.
We'll see.
But yeah,
don't give me too much credit. This could still crash and burn.
This could still crash and burn. Yeah, I mean that's a potential for everything I do at this point. I've given up. I've given up being an optimist and like hoping for any kind of success. I expect everything to just be.
But this will not be a sad bastard podcast.
No. I only get like that. No. I can't be sad when I'm talking about the X-Men. I only get like that when I'm talking about myself.
Or building stories.
Or building stories, but then
it's thematically appropriate.
But then it still turns around to basically talking about myself, and that's what bothers me about it.
It's too real.
But yes, so we're gonna read X-Men #1. I think next week we'll put it up. I don't have any hard schedules planned, but we're planning on doing this podcast weekly. So it'll at least I can have some regular stuff posted on this YouTube channel at least once a week. So I think 10 subscribers. I'm absolutely floored that there are 10 people that subscribed to this YouTube channel.
That's double digits.
Probably at double digits, technically speaking. Technically correct. The best kind of correct. And I'm pretty sure they're all people that I know, and I'm very thankful that you take the time to do that. And we'll have some regular X-Men discussions with me and Alex, and then fairly regular, maybe not as regular as often as I can schedule them with other independent creators, where they and I will just kind of maybe do a little shop talk, just kind of talking about how depressing it is to make comics, or maybe how great it is. I have some friends who are actually, comics are going okay for them. Those sons of bitches. But
it's the long game. It's the long game.
It's the long game, yeah. And I'm not trying to sound like a sad sack. I'm just playing it up for the comedy. I swear.
Comedy and tragedy sometimes walk hand in hand.
Yeah, this is the kind of tangents you can expect in a quality podcast like ours. Not on the X-Men podcast. Now I'm referring to the Creator Hangout version of the podcast that we are now in. I was having a discussion with another comic creator friend of mine, and it's really easy as comic creators, as independent, struggling, guys trying to just figure out what you want to do, who you are, and how you get people to read it. It's really easy to turn into sad sacks and just kind of go down that hole where you're just this industry is stupid. All people that read comics are stupid. People that make comics are stupid, and I don't know why I'm doing this, and it's awful. And I was having a discussion, and it sort of turned into that. And then I reached a certain point where I was just like, this conversation is over. I cannot keep this is I'm a pretty depressing person, when I'm alone. And I can't double that. I can't talk to somebody else about it. It's awful. It's too much. I don't want to hear it. So I make a conscious effort not to get too nihilistic when I'm discussing things with other people now.
You're a good man, Aaron Walther.
Yes. As long as I don't get too much wild turkey in me, I'll be fine.
Well, isn't that always the name of the game?
It might play a certain role in how the X-Men podcast go. We'll see.
We'll see.
I think you and I have, I'm having a mental battle where if I'm going to say if we shot the shit or just I'm trying to think of a more censored version of that, even though I don't really normally censor myself.
Yeah.
But I think you and I have had I think we've had a nice rambling discussion about, nothing particularly important, other than
our noble aims.
Our noble aims, yes, our lofty goals, as I said. But next week we will be talking about X-Men #1, and
it's going to be amazing.
We'll go from there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think out of all the old X-Men books, X-Men #1 is probably the one that there's the most to say about it, certainly.
If you listen to only one X-Men podcast this month, I hope it's next week's.
I hope it's, the one we put up next week under to be determined.
Right on.
Filler name. All right, well, we're gonna end this conversation because I know Alex wants to get back to hanging out with his wife and his dog.
Gotta walk the dog.
Talking to me. Gotta walk the dog. Yeah, it's responsibility.
Yeah, she's actually staring at me close to the door. She's kind of saying it might be time.
She's waiting. She's waiting. Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna end it here. I hope everybody got a kick out of our nonsense, and if nothing else. If you didn't listen to this, then maybe you'll be surprised at some regular X-Men podcasts popping up. But until then, my name was Aaron Walther, and my buddy here is named Alex Harner, and we will see you all next time.